Welcome back to Kin in Line. This I make part 77. So we start here in about 1984. I'm working on the Evening Post, and this was my second news editor. I've got a picture of this is Cliff Foster, who's a UK expat who I worked with and befriended. Really good professional journalist. He later returned to the UK after he retired. Just to show you on the back, this is on a brown envelope addressed to Mr. Ken Bentley Evening Post. So, yeah, that places this in the 4 years I was on the Post from 84 to 88, covering the uprising by the UDF against apartheid, essentially, among other stories. I was a sort of general news reporter, but so I started off working under Ralph Jarvis. This is him at one of our terminals. We had the ATEX system. It was a precursor to modern sort of Microsoft software. This was just a mainframe, I think you would describe it. And we all worked through it. You didn't have your personal terminal. You just logged on wherever there was one available. And I forget this guy's surname. This was an old one of the subs, Stan somebody or other. So he passed away, I think, in the early 90s when I was in the UK. So Ralph Jarvis also left journalism, and he went to join some evangelical pastor who still is, I think, active in the KwaZulu-Natal area. But I think I got him quite well here. I can sort of picture him. So here's an interesting one drawn on the inside of a notepad, of the cover of a notebook. And this was Raymond Hill, a so-called coloured guy who was one of our fellow reporters on the Post. You can just see a little figure on the top left, also suggested. Raymond always carried a copy of the first edition of the Evening Post rolled up in his jacket pocket, which you can see on the left of him there. Sitting on one of these office chairs with the terminal, you can see on the left. I think I've got another drawing of him taking dictate. This was a guy I met early on. He was on the subs on the Post, Stephen Rolls, looking, I continued working with him right up until I was ousted from the Herald in 2016 for being a little bit too anti the corrupt ANC regime. So this is Raymond Hill again. We saw him with his rolled up newspaper. And sometimes if you were available, you took a dictate. This obviously is pre-cell phones, even pre-laptops pretty much. You could get mobile word processors that you could take up, but not many people used them. They rather just phoned the story in, mainly from the courts. But if you were stuck out somewhere in the sticks with a story, you could just phone it in, and somebody would put the headphones on and take the dictate. So these are mainly my colleagues at the time. This guy was the political correspondent for the Evening Post, Dirk van Zyl. Like me, he had worked for the PFP for a while. And I think his father was the Secretary of Parliament. So he had connections up in the echelons of South African political establishment, I guess. Wish I could remember her name. It should come to me. But yeah, a shock of blonde hair on the phone, one of our reporters on the Post. Oh, yeah. And then this one, Robin Stevenson, that's correct. He was a sort of very senior already when I got there. Father of Bobby Stevenson, the DA member of the Legislative Assembly in Bishu. For a long time also a city councillor in Port Elizabeth. So this was his dad. And next is a guy I worked very closely with in the 80s as the UDF struggle intensified, and this is Jimmy Machu. Jimmy essentially was the editor of the extra edition. And it sounded racist to have a thing called an extra edition, but it's the one that the township dwellers, mainly Africans and perhaps colored people as well, bought, because Jimmy ensured that it contained the latest news about the struggle or about the oppression or, everything that dealt with the apartheid issue. And I tried to work with Jimmy, and I think together we made quite a good team. Briefly on the Post, we had this guy, Mike Lowe, who I've got tapping away on this word processor thing we used, the ATEX. And Mike eventually, I believe, is still working on the Daily Dispatch. Unlike me, he didn't get himself sacked. This guy, I can't remember his name, John somebody or other. He was there when I first arrived on the Post, and I think he was the municipal reporter. Then I think he might have emigrated. A lot of people scarpered when the unrest, so-called, kicked in the 80s. This chap at the top is Bob Everly, also sketched during my time. He was the arts and entertainment writer, but he's avoiding being noticed by staying out of focus, which is very unpleasant of him. It's Ralph Jarvis again at the bottom, but he too is... It's funny how sometimes this phone just doesn't deliver, and I refuse to give up. I think you need a steady hand. To hell with it. I can't remember her name. She's instantly in focus. Also a reporter on the Post. And I think this could be the same woman. She clearly had a figure that wasn't unattractive. Then I think this might be Brian Voss-Smith, I think is how he pronounced his name, who was the director of the Midland Chamber of Industry. They later amalgamated with the Port Elizabeth Chamber of Commerce and became, I think, what's it now? Chamber of Business or something. This was I became the municipal reporter on the Post, and then later also for the Herald. Because that was where, there were big issues like desegregating the beaches and just the general collapse of apartheid. And so it was and it also linked in with the struggle at a local level by the UDF. So I drew Phil Frikkie Kotze here. He was one of the National Party city councillors. I clearly could see him as I sat there reporting, and was able to do quite a few sketches of him. This is him again, poor guy, a victim of my pen, but you can see his face lent itself to exaggeration. This woman, I have no idea who she is. Anyway, it's a nice quick sketch. Few lines do the trick. And yeah, there were so many of these UDF leaders that I engaged with over the years, and I can't recall who this guy is. But the UDF was essentially the ANC, a front for the ANC, which was had been banned since the early 60s and was unbanned in 1990. I can remember going to the historic Opera House in Whites Road in Port Elizabeth to a midday jazz little concert. So it wasn't all politics, And anyway, this saxophonist, I think the hand works quite well, particularly. But I've always enjoyed drawing musicians for some reason. It's because they essentially are posing. They have to be there and do what they do. So they do lend themselves to being sketched. Here's another older lady. Can we get her nicely in focus there? That's the thing. And this guy, I can't recall who he is. That's the thing about even these little video clips. They don't do justice to the picture, because particularly subtle ones like this and that previous one, you actually just have to see the original to appreciate it. So this is drawn somewhere in downtown PE, I guess. Maybe when I was doing court reporting already. That's a whole different saga. I'll get onto those pictures shortly. But I quite like this. This is Africa. These are the stalwarts, the mamas. I think I recognize this woman. She was one of the subs that I worked with, Marlene McCall, I think it is. Just recognize her from her sort of pose there. Again, struggling to focus. And at some point I got out into the sticks and drew this. No recollection of where. Looks like the sea on the right there. An old chap. I've learned a trick here. So if you touch the screen where the image is that you want, it seems to focus on that. That's a useful thing. Let's try again. Yeah. Cool. Old dogs and new tricks. So this is the last one of this little batch. Very quick sketch, touch the screen, of a steam train. This was the Apple Express. Very quick sketch, but it used to be a big tourist attraction, a narrow gauge steam train that ran from PE all the way across the Van Stadens River out into the Langkloof. It brought apples to the harbour and for export, hence the name. Anyway, we'll get back to the Apple Express again in another post, but for now, cheers.